Welcome back to the Disrupt Education podcast. Hi, Allie. How's it going?
Well, Peter, I know you're wrapping up the school year at the
Yes.
time of this recording. Everything's in bloom and, just feels like there's always this time of year when everything is like so beautiful and bright and colorful, and it's a little magical. And it's almost, like like it's not of this world. Sometimes I look at the plants and I think, wow, they couldn't be any, just fresh. And anyway, so I was thinking about that in terms of our guests today, because there's this element of things being, like in front of you, like the real world, and then maybe something that's a virtual experience, and whatnot, and how even in real life that could there's a blurring when everything just pops.
Well played. I like it. That's a great. Elliot Mack is here with us today, the co-founder of Daigon Esports. Am I saying that right, Elliot?
All good. Perfect.
Awesome. So, all right, we're going to go into this one. And wow, eloquent. See, Allie, I'm salt of the earth. Allie's just eloquent speaker. This is why we work together. But Elliot is the co-founder of Daigon Esports, some very internationally known, some big tournaments, but there's an educational component we're going to dive into on this. Well, first, Elliot, welcome to the show. And then if you don't mind, giving a little bit of a brief overview of who you are and what you're doing today.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for having me on. So I'm Elliot Mack. I am the co-founder and CEO of Daigon Esports, where we help international schools get started with esports and gaming. So we organize competitive esports leagues for international schools, as well as the educational gaming after school club, where we use gaming as a doorway to exploring 21st century skills, careers, and other interpersonal skills in a incidental learning through play way. So yeah, that's what we do. You talked about the name a little bit, so maybe I can explain where the name comes from, because people seem to never know how exactly to pronounce it. But I heard it was the same for Verizon in the beginning, so that I guess that's reassuring. And so essentially, it comes from eudaimonia in ancient Greek, which is the feeling of just well-being and happiness and just like fulfillment. It's just like all the terms of like happiness and fulfillment. And then so the die from that, and then agon in Greek, in ancient Greek as well, is like competitions, like like the sports competitions they used to have. And so it's the idea being that it's like competitions that can help with well-being and happiness for kids passionate about esports. So that's where it comes from, and so that's the background to the name. Anyways, but when you're struggling to find a name, you do what you can, right?
I think that's like that is okay. There you go. Right. I'm actually going to use this part of the podcast for my entrepreneurship classes, because that's very unique, and I love that backdrop on that. We're going to dive into that. I want like our listeners love to know. Okay, so we bring a lot of interesting people with a lot of great ideas and a lot of movement in the education realm. But I think it's important to first understand. So, as a person who got to becoming an entrepreneur and involved with esports, how did you get there? What was your educational path like?
Yeah, so I'm actually a third culture kid. So I'm French American, but I was born in Brussels, Belgium, and raised partly there, and then raised in Istanbul, Turkey as well. So I attended kind of international schools in both places, and I really wanted to explore my identity as the American part of my identity, and so I went to college in the U.S. And I was very fortunate and blessed to do so, and that's where I kind of got more formally introduced to the world of just, I mean, A, higher education, and B, like entrepreneurship realistically. And so during that time, which also kind of ended up being during COVID, which was a big moment for esports as well. And I feel like when a lot of people might have heard about esports for the first time, and I was also gaming a lot, which helped contextualize this. So during that time, essentially, one of my like a friend that I met through a mutual international school friend, so I have my co-founder, Younes. He is Danish Moroccan, grew up in Copenhagen, Paris, and Casablanca. And we had a mutual friend. We had never gone to school together, but we met through a mutual friend once. And then we kind of stayed in contact. And then during COVID, we started, gaming together a lot more. And we became really, really good friends. And we were just talking about everything that was going on. And, obviously pro esports had kind of the size it had taken and the being at the forefront. And we just got to chatting about the kind of the gaps between the opportunities for like pro esports players, and then the gap that there was between other sports and esports in terms of amateur opportunities and the ability to, be part of a team, kind of find your belonging, compete, and kind of get all the benefits of being involved in structured sports for, esports. And so that's how it really started. And then, we did like an incubation program at Georgetown, and it kind of spurred from there. And then there was kind of just a whole path to us going back to one of the first conversations we ever had actually around esports which was how fun would it have been if, my group of friends from Istanbul competed against your group of friends from Copenhagen, especially that we were part of the same network of schools. And we had this mutual connection. And so we knew of each other, and we kind of knew each other. We had met like once or twice or whatever. We were like, oh, that would have been so fun. That would have been so nice. And we didn't really think anything about it until we kind of came down the journey. And at one point we were just like, remember what we said, like one of those first conversations we had, like what about that? What about that space? Like, what about bringing it to who we were a couple of years ago? And helping, those amateurs find their team, their space, and their belonging, and being able to at their school through their passion.
We love entrepreneurial journeys here, and just like how education can kind of springboard, totally different ways to do life beyond, your schooling route. And yours is definitely unique. We don't have a lot of people on here who have done international school, so I'm almost thinking like we might need to dive into that on a different episode. But in terms of esports, so people, I know in the educational setting there is kind of, there's different sides of, like, is gaming good for kids? Is it bad for kids? Like, how is this helping them learn? And so I'm curious on the work that you do, how you address that, or what you've encountered, and how you kind of talk about esports and gaming and this world in terms of teaching and learning. So can you tell us a little bit more about those kind of barriers or things you have to talk through when bringing that into a school environment?
Yeah, I think it's definitely always a question. And I think that, maybe it is that academic background, but I think that I just stick to just like the research, plain and cold and simple. I know that there's feelings about things, and, people had feelings about calculators, and people had feelings about, a wide variety of everything. And then there's, what does the science, what do, people who study this and do research into this say? And, I don't pretend to be an expert myself, but I like to read. And so I spend a lot of time reading what, people a lot smarter than me have said on the subject. And that's really where I start. And we actually share with schools like a parent pack that just dives into a bunch of the peer-reviewed articles. And I mean, so that's usually like the angle I tend to take. There's so many angles, right? Like you can take the angle of like, well, kids already, and this is what, I sometimes say, but just tend to go more of like, well, this is what all these scientists and this is all the peer-reviewed research. But there's also just the angle of like, kids are doing this. I think it's 92% of boys and I think 87% of teenage girls play video games in some form, either on their phone or their tablets, their consoles, their PCs, whatever it might be. And then the question becomes really simple. Do you want to A, go against your child's interests or your student's interests? Do you want to embrace it and try to see what you can gain from it? Um, and and yeah, do you want to like essentially take the time they're already spending and just enhance it, make it better, make it more structured, and give them the resources and tools to, you know, think through and set boundaries and have those conversations. But what I always say is, if anything, I see the work we do and the work others do in the space of structuring amateur esports, especially around like schooling age, as we're giving you the doorway to start a conversation. And shutting down something that your students or kids, whatever it may be, are passionate about is usually not the best way to start a conversation. And so yeah, that's really just that's kind of the other angle here is like, it's not us, like we're not making them play it. Everybody games. That's what I try to explain to everyone is, everybody does it. Teens these days, everyone does it. Like, now what are you going to do? What are you going to do about that fact? Or, sure, you can try to ban it with, any measure you want. You can be like, this doesn't belong or whatever. But I think it's honestly just counterproductive. And in the end, I think it's more detrimental than anything because there's so much good that can come from it is the second part. And when you look at the peer reviewed research, that's when you get into some of that. And I mean, I was, reading up on the World Economic Forum's like Education 4.0 framework. And literally one of the examples they use, and I'm sure we'll dive into this a little bit more, is like game design as one of the applications for their framework. And, I think a big discussion as well is like screen use versus screen time. A lot of people are concerned about, and rightly so, like, teens and kids screen use, screen time. But I think that actually when, the most important in that case is looking at screen use. Like, what are they doing with their time on screens? Are they being passive consumers, or are they, being and like, just receiving and, passively receiving, or are they engaging and, exactly like enhancing the time, like taking the time that they spend on screens to do something productive where they're engaged, their creativity is engaged, their cognitive abilities are engaged, their communication abilities, their teamwork abilities, like all their interpersonal skills are engaged, right? Like, I don't think you can weigh all of that the same way. And it was actually interesting because in that report that I was like diving into, preparing actually for a panel, they literally, discussed just that specific issue of, what matters is to avoid situations which, in which children become passive recipients, where they don't have room for creativity, they don't have personal engagement, they don't have real life interaction and play, because they're, stuck in front of someone talking at them alone. Whereas video games is quite the opposite. It's, in a lot of ways very pro-social. And again, once you bring that into the school, bring that into an environment, a community where they can belong, they can interact, they can be part of a team, then it's just like adding on to those benefits. So yeah, that's generally like the approach I take. And, if people, disagree, then I usually say, well, here's a bunch of peer reviewed articles. Here's, the World Economic Forum framework, and, to take it or leave it. It's not my word, right? It's, so take it up with the experts. I'm not going to debate you on this.
I feel like your story is actually proving that, right? Because when you were gaming, and with somebody, you might not have met with too much, and then that brought you together to come up with an idea to do something. I think about my own son, because, obviously he's a senior in high school, and, building computers and such, and that's what he does, and then he resells them. But he meets people who's also interested in it. He actually goes places to sell or buy merchandise. So there's, obviously there's a safety component to that and all that, because that's what every parent's like, but but that's action. There's actionable steps along with it. I can go all the way back, and I don't know if you know this, Elliot, but maybe we had this in the conversation because we talked a couple times. But my younger brother, who is a video game developer engineer for a subsidiary of Activision, literally started by playing games. It wasn't, okay, I'm going to age myself, but it wasn't as easy to connect with people online as it is now. But he ended up, going through that because it sparked his interest, and that's where he went. And now they're also talking about, virtual reality games that are actually going to help you with skills and, changing oil to, painting a wall or whatever. I mean, it's pretty amazing what you can do. And then you can like have fun competitions and different things like that. So I heard a lot of like networking, a lot of, teamwork and different things like that. Where do you imagine, and I know you're in the early stages of this, but where do you imagine like maybe some of the first skills that you're going to look at, or you're going to watch this thing organically grow? What is kind of your strategy there, or maybe a hypothesis, if you will?
Yeah, so actually, I think that, we are currently having like a kind of our pilot competition ahead of our bigger launch this fall. And already there, just organically asking the teachers who are the coaches, like some of the teachers slash coaches, what they're just instinctively, what have they been experiencing? Mm-hmm. You see all these things that, again, like if you look at the same, World Economic Forum, like what are the skills of tomorrow? It's, innovation, creativity, interpersonal skills, global citizenship, especially in our case, because, they're realizing that there's, a world beyond theirs, and that there's like, in the case of this league, there's a school in Krakow, there's a school in Bulgaria, in Sofia, there's a school in Antwerp in Belgium. And so, we also organized an event with like a school in Korea, a school in South Africa. And so all of a sudden it's like, oh wait, yeah, we are part of, there's another kid across the other side of the world that has similar interests to mine. And, we're not that different, and we share a lot of common, and we have this shared passion. I think that's the most beautiful thing about video games, is that it's a global, like, and, social media does that to some extent, but I think video games and movies as well, but video games especially, it's a global point of reference. Like, you will have, absolute fans of Zelda everywhere. And they'll have that same, cultural frame of reference, regardless of their, nationality or cultural background. They'll have this kind of shared niche passion and the ability to be part of wider communities that spread beyond borders. And I think that gaming is especially a particularly great example. And even for friendships, I mean, you see pop up online all the time these videos of like people meeting their gaming friends in real life for the first time, and it's like the most like heartwarming, the best videos ever. It's like, they spent 7 years like just being friends online, never met up in person, and then they decide to like drive across the country to meet them, and they meet up and they whatever, and it's such an interesting and like quite uniquely, our time experience. But yeah, I think that in terms of looking at what comes of it, I think that we'll get to, more like data driven specific studies, but we'll get there. And, definitely looking at leadership, team building, communication, as really the top like 3 skills, and essentially any skill that you would get from being in another team, in a structured environment. So for like sports, just essentially being able to prove, because you will have the athletic directors or PE teachers that are less convinced, like essentially being able to prove that those same skills that they get, being part of any sports team, they're getting, being part of an esports team as well. And again, the research is there. It's more about proving it on our specific cohort, but I think that's what we'll be looking at first, is those transferable skills that you get from being part of a team, and any other.
The interconnectedness of gaming, globally, I do, it really does transcend borders, this idea of gaming and learning and everything. So you mentioned that, COVID and, the pandemic kind of springboarded or, I mean, everybody jumped more online because, that was the way to interact. And so it's much more normal to do so. So how can, gamifying education, help like even beyond the esports, but like does the work that you do tie into the regular classroom and like encouraging these types of skills and interconnectedness? Have you seen in your work at all that kind of transfer into the classroom, or you want to do more of that work in the classroom with gaming, with kind of, I mean, I see it as disrupting, education, like actually, but like using games to get people to learn, because kids they really are interested in gaming, and it's very popular, as you said, like 90% or above, right? So how do you see the work that you do really like bleed into the teaching and learning space in the classroom?
Yeah, so it's actually quite interesting that you asked that question, because we had a very relevant just conversation today we were visiting a school actually today, and we had a really great conversation around that very question. So we, right now are focusing mostly on the kind of the after school space, right? And I remember that I was at an educational conference, and they were talking about the rigidity of the curriculum, right? And how when you have learning objectives and there's only so much time in a day and there's a lot to cover and you got to do it, so that might not leave as much time for experimental and like just experimenting with different subjects, or whatever it might be. And so we were really in this space of like, oh yeah, this is great. Like the after school space is great because there's not the pressure of the learning objectives of the curriculum of we need a grade and assign and we need to assess everything. And it can be more of a kind of an innovation lab in a sense from an educational perspective. That then, if it spills over and if there's now ideas in how we can transfer that into the curriculum, then great. That was kind of the original, like that was our original thought process. So, and this is talking more specifically about our educational gaming after school club, where we're testing out really a lot of different formats, whether that be, bringing in professional esports, people work in the professional esports industry to talk about their job, whether that be, kind of looking at games that are already played and ways that we can kind of extract more like incidental learning from them, whether that be, wide variety of different kind of formats, history of video games, whatever. There's a lot of things to already kind of explore there that we're trying to, explore as much as possible and kind of see what works best and then iterate through that. So that was our original kind of thought process around it. But today, actually, we had a conversation where we were kind of asked, like, essentially the context being that the school had has a spot to fill in terms of teaching game design. So they had a game design course, an elective, right? And now there was a gap because a teacher was leaving, and so they were like, could you kind of adapt what you've been doing and kind of push it a bit more in the game design the direction? So that's already something we're looking at, and I'll talk about it a little bit more. But I really believe in the power of game design, and just as like, well, overall everything as a tool for empowerment, and the importance, I believe of feeling empowered in today's age, and I'm sure we'll dive into that a bit more. But anyways, that is a request that we have gotten even from a school that has, they have enough budget and whatever to do that. And so now we're kind of considering, that's a potential pathway as well, as how can we potentially maybe create a kind of semi-virtual or asynchronous game design course that can be easily implemented. So, it is something we're looking at, and I do really, really, really believe in the power of game design. And for me, it is kind of like the ultimate project-based learning that is, interdisciplinary that, ties in just so many skills. It's actually funny because, again, I'm going to keep going back to the World Economic Forum's like Education 4.0 framework. But as I was reading it, the literal example that they pointed out, for basically they have a taxonomy of the different skills, right, with different levels of skills and whatever. And one of the examples that they give to provide a technology related example is a child tasked with developing a simple gaming app, and how they'd be acquiring and exercising particular competency in that. And so they outline, all the different examples, like all the different skills that would be, and I invite people to go check it out. It's really cool, but all the different skills that would be utilized for it: global citizenship, collaboration, problem solving, digital skills and programming, creativity, and how that all ties into a project of designing a game app. And they kind of give it as a, detailed example of, if this was in a group setting, then they can work, in a group. And then if you, add in, like, the thing that's great with game design is you can pick any subject, right? You can, if you want to make it about, environmental citizenship or stewardship, you can pick a game that's about saving the environment. If you want to make it about mental health, then there's games out there that have been developed around the subject of mental health. So you can really take like any subject, and then you break it down, right? You need to create stories. So you're going to bring in some like character arcs, and you're going to be bringing in some concepts from, literature, and developing, a character and a hero within your story. You're going to take some concepts from like physics and math in terms of like the 3D modeling and, the different like aspects of just the game mechanics. And then there's thinking through the whole like storyline and the specific quest. Like there's so much that goes into it, and you can pull from so many different, directions. And there's actually a story I really, really love about the interdisciplinary nature of game design. It's when I was visiting the school, and teacher stopped me and was like, and literally in the corridors as we were walking by, and he was like, "Oh, you guys, I heard you guys do like video game stuff, whatever." And he was telling us a story about how he was teaching kids about the French Revolution in class. And there was this kid that usually is like always in the back of the class, never answering a single question, never engaging. And all of a sudden they get to the chapter about, French Revolution, and this kid knows everything. He's answering every question. He's correcting the teacher on certain dates, on certain key facts, and the teacher's going back to look, and the kid's right. Like, what's going on here? Like, and so he goes to see after, one or two sessions, he goes to see the kid at the end of the class, and he's like, like, how do you know all this? Like, this is so impressive. And he's like, oh yeah, I finished Assassin's Creed Unity like 3 times, and it's set in, the French Revolution era. And so I know all about the landmarks and the dates and the historical figures. And he's like, oh wow. And so the teacher was great because he brought him in and he actually made him present on the game and on, and he actually then led that course. But Assassin's Creed is a perfect example of a very famous game that pulls in so much from history, right? And there's so much historiography and, historical work that goes into preparing a game like that. That's just a perfect example of, it's a great vehicle for so many other things. And that's how I really believe it can enhance education. It's interest-based. It's like the ultimate project-based learning. It's interdisciplinary, and it ties a lot of skills that, not me saying, but World Economic Forum saying we're going to need for the years to come. So that's really where I see video games in terms of like in the classroom.
I graduated in 1990, so I'm just going to throw that out there. I'm old. I do remember programming. And the only reason why I remember programming here, Elliot, is because I programmed a tic-tac-toe game, like very basic, we're talking about old school. And then even before that, and this is for the techie nerds out there way back, the TSI, was it the Radio Shack? It was an old computer. I had a Commodore 64. I'm geeking out here, Ali, sorry. But the Oregon Trail, the entire Gen X generation will talk about the Oregon Trail and what were the passes through the Rocky Mountains. Because to your point, I couldn't say them right now, but I know back then everybody knew them because they'd play that game. And now what's interesting is there's a lot of open source and different ways to kind of cut into different games and to manipulate and make them your own and stuff. Can you kind of, do you know of any of those? Are you guys using any of those? I know the competitions are here and you're playing, these great games. My brother is one of the leads, or was one of the leads on one of the Call of Duties, the Spyro, a couple of cool games there. I just got to give him a shout out because, you know, he's younger and awesome. But like, yeah, where does open source come into this, where students can kind of manipulate and say, you know what, I don't like this, or maybe even they found a mistake in a game and correct it? What have you seen in that kind of area?
So I think the best example for that would be Minecraft. And this is a perfect time for me to talk about empowerment, because I think your story is really that. I think that I think that the greatest thing about tech in general, and I think game design is a perfect example, is feeling of like, I made this, this did not exist, and I made it, right? And I think that, you know, maybe like a few centuries ago, that was, you know, something that everyone was able to feel when, you know, through craftsmanship or whatnot. But I feel like in today's day and age, it is like the ultimate form of empowerment to be able to say there was nothing and I created something and I can put that out and people can use it and enjoy it. I feel like that is at the essence of, you know, even like the entrepreneurial mind of saying there was nothing, I created something, and now someone can use it. I think that feeling today is probably the most important feeling we can kind of have students feel, especially in the, you know, 10 years ago, you could learn everything through YouTube and through the internet. Now you not only can learn anything through YouTube and the internet, you can get a personalized teacher at the, you know, edge of your fingertips with AI. And so I think that in the age of AI, that like empowerment is the most important skill. And to that point about open worlds and whatnot, in Minecraft, the thing that's great is that you can start creating your own like servers. You can like tweak servers and maps, and you can create your own game modes. You can create, you know, your own mods, which are essentially like additions to the game as well. And then another great one is Roblox, where you can do similar things, where you can create your own kind of mini games. And, you know, this can be as young as like 9 to 10-year-olds creating their own games in Roblox, mini games, right? So those are two great examples. And I know that Roblox is looking into AI-based like prompting. So prompting to creating games, essentially, which, you know, that puts a lot of all these conversations in perspective, because now I just know how to write what I want. I can start creating my own games just through text, and that opens up a whole another can of worms. But and then the final example, just really recently, is Fortnite, which just released an update, and they're basically becoming a, you know, what we call a sandbox video game, which is these video games like Minecraft and Roblox, where you can create modes and games in the game. And so you have now a lot of people starting to look at creating modes and games and maps in Fortnite as well. But yeah, that's a great way to get started, and that's what I tell most people. And I feel like most educators don't know this, but like Roblox has a whole section of like pre-made classes, and with lesson plans and, you know, all the resources you need to start teaching these skills. And, you know, game design looks like something that's really complex and really complicated, but I think with, you know, things like Minecraft, Roblox, and then today with things like, you know, AI, frankly, we're getting to a point where it is going to become easier and easier, and I think that it is such a great tool. And on the point of AI, there's actually a really great video on YouTube. I recommend checking it out. It's this guy that builds Flappy Bird in Unreal Engine, or maybe Unity, I don't remember, like one or two of the big game development engines, using just AI, like just ChatGPT, and he recreates, and then I think he uses also some of the stable diffusion or like Midjourney to create the original graphics, but he recreates the whole game and he walks through the process of how that works. And oh, I tried this, and then the bird, you know, spinning on itself, so I had to figure out how to do that. And obviously he knows how to code, so he knows what he's doing, and he just like, he doesn't write a line of code, but, you know, obviously you wouldn't be able to do that without knowing how to code, but, you know, we're getting there. So I think all of these things really put into perspective and are making game development as a tool for learning so, you know, really accessible. And I hope we start seeing more, you know, just like projects of learning that involve just designing your own game around the subject at hand, whether that be history, the environment, or, you know, anything else.
Just the ability to create, you know, virtually, and then disseminate that, you know, anywhere. There's so much power in that, in terms of learning and just the interconnected nature of gaming, and then it just is a way to engage learners. All of that, all those pieces, I'm like excited to see where the company kind of grows, beyond the after school arena into, like, how do we incorporate gaming and game design and like this into the classroom and everything. And one thing you said about, like, being in the after school space, is really a benefit because you don't have this rigid curriculum. But then it always goes back to, I think, like, so then, like, why do we have this rigid curriculum? Like, I'm just like, if these types of environments is where students thrive and they pour so much into learning and developing, it's like so backwards to be in the after school environment when it's like, how can we plug this? I just see it as like a desire to really learn and grow, right? In esports is one way. There's different, even like a traditional sports team, right? Like there are students who plug into a traditional, football, basketball, volleyball, tennis, running, like whatever sport they're doing, and that could be an esport. And they learn all of these, we've talked with people about like durable skills and lifelong skills and 21st century skills and whatever, beyond just rote memorization or the objectives and standards that we have to meet to cross a list. So with all of that, what do you see, kind of like a vision for what the educational system could be like, with including more gaming and esports? What is the education system missing? And like, what kind of paint us a picture of how you could see the work that you do really benefiting and evolving and disrupting in a good way the educational system.
Before answering that question, I think we actually had this discussion at a workshop at the Council of British International Schools conference. I think it was like 2 weeks ago. And it basically came down to the conclusion, to cut it short, and then I'll give you the optimistic answer, is that the bottleneck is with universities and entrance examinations and the ways that universities assess students for entry. And I'll just, in case this reaches the right ears, there's someone listening out there that wants to start like an AI-based like interviewing agent that takes into account the whole student, and that the hard thing about the process right now is that it's not scalable, right? To consider each student for everything that they are. But hopefully with AI, that would be something that's possible. So you interview, you chat with an AI, you tell them your whole story, and then based on the university, they kind of filter out what it is that they're looking for in their students at scale. If someone wants to do that, I think it'll be the most beneficial thing for education of this century. Because I think that really is where the bottleneck is. Unfortunately, the curriculum is fit for a specific purpose, which is measuring who gets to go to what university, and unfortunately that bottlenecks the whole system. So that's kind of the more skeptical, pessimistic answer. In terms of how what's missing and how it may be disruptive or disrupted. I really think, again, like it goes back to just this thing of it being considered either there's kind of two ways that I see it. It's either it is integrated across classes as just like an easy go-to, project-based learning module for a variety of courses, whether that be the English teacher deciding to do one, whether that be across courses. So that's one potential model where it's like just making sure that teachers are empowered to use it as like a project-based learning tool, and making that easy and modular for them. And maybe there's something to do there. And then the other alternative is just, making just how like coding has finally and took so much time to like really get into the curriculum and whatever, that we can be a bit more quick to react in terms of what we integrate into the curriculum, and having a proper space for video games and everything that goes with it, from the graphic design side to the coding side to all the other skills, whether it be the figuring out the music soundtrack, for example, which is a huge thing. There's a huge industry of just people who just make music for video games, and it's super impressive. But yeah, so I guess there's kind of two ways to look at it, but I think ideally it would, and I think we're getting there, is kind of the first one I said, where it becomes so accessible and so easy for teachers to start using these things, right? Even like, let's talk about like 2 or 3 years from now, even maybe 5, where you can just do everything through prompting and you're able to create your own worlds and think critically about all this, but you don't have to do the hard part of like coding, but you can still use it as a tool and an interest-based tool and a interdisciplinary and like tool to apply to other learning experiences. Like, I mean, it'd be so cool. Like, I could see like a history class, right, where everybody has a specific, thing to figure out within that history, maybe within that like historical time frame of that historical event. And one person's in charge of designing a mini game where you just do this specific action. I don't know, maybe if you're studying like the War of Independence or whatever it may be, like one person is all about designing like what would a camp look like, right? And then another one is like what would how would you armor up, right? And the whole game is just armoring up and collecting the evidence around what that may have looked like. And you have another one looking at the maps and the geography and creating just like a map-based game recreating a timeline, right? Like there's, and I don't think we're that far from that being very accessible. I mean, I hope not, at least. I guess I've read that there's always like a hype and then a slump, so maybe we're a lot further than I think. But yeah, I think that would be the way I see it.
Elliot, how can people find you and understand, like, how can we connect and see where you're going with this? Not only just on the gaming side, because you have some amazing tournaments worldwide, and then additionally, what are your thoughts on the United States? Because I know you're worldwide. Haven't seen you stateside yet.
Yeah, so on the first question, you can find us through our website, daigonesports.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Elliot Mack. You can email me, elliot.mack@daigonesports.com. And on the question of how I find the US, well, first of all, half my family's from there. So if they ever come across this podcast and I say anything bad, then it's going to be really weird next time Christmas comes around. And then no, I really like, I think, and the way I put it is always this, I think that, my entrepreneurial spirit would never have blossomed if I had not, or not in the way it did, I think, at least, if I had not been blessed to study in the US and be, again, it comes back to the empowerment thing. I think like everyone I met in the US felt very empowered and like they could do whatever they wanted to do, or maybe not everyone. I'm obviously stereotyping and overgeneralizing, but that's definitely the overarching feeling I got. Whereas I feel like a lot of places in Europe, it was always a lot like, it was like, you can't do that. Like you don't have this, you don't have that, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. Like you can't do that. That's not allowed. Like, why would you do that? Or not even thinking of doing something. I think that on the flip side of that is that in the US, you have this thing of like work being so important, such an important part of life. Sometimes I think too important. And so I think I like being in Europe as an American, where it's like I get that, but I also get people just looking at me and telling me to stop working and slow down and enjoy life. So I think that's how I find the balance currently. But maybe that'll switch. Maybe at some point I'll be like I need to get my entrepreneurial flame back. I need to go back to the US for a bit. But no, I think having lived in DC, it was I really loved my time living there, and no, I always love going back. So the next time I'm there, I'll make sure to stop by.
I love that take, and thank you so much for that, because that's so important. And actually, if you come back, you might have to jump out of an airplane with Allie. So because she's all about that, kind of changing up things. But I digress. Allie, final thoughts on this episode?
Well, I was going to go somewhere different, but since you brought up skydiving, I'm thinking, you're encouraging, students after school, with esports, and there's that same issue with skydiving, in the collegiate space, that it is a sport, and people don't understand that it's a sport, and all of the benefits of, risk taking and conquering fears with the sport has so many other benefits than maybe like what people think as, some like death defying, one and done bucket list type item. And there's a lot of misconceptions around it. And I think the same with Elliot's work with esports is that, you're building this awareness of how it can really benefit a system. And you're almost like, I just see the work that you do is you're like, oh, we're going to come in and we're going to work after school, and you're going to see these students really blossom. And then the teachers are going to be wondering like, well, what changed? And it's like, well, we found a way to engage them in ways that they were already engaged. We just directed their efforts into a more learning focused way, and capturing that, I just think we need more people doing that type of work, because then we, every school district says, we want all learners to do these types of things. And you can't reach all learners if you limit their options and interests. And so there's a lot to be said about the gaming world and how that can capture a learner. And so I think the work that you're doing, Elliot, is great. And look forward to seeing how it integrates more and more into the educational system.
Well, I'll say the last piece because Ali kind of touched on it. Is and the thing we didn't really discuss that much is how great of a vehicle it is for inclusion as well. And whether that be inclusion for, kids who might not find a belonging in traditional extracurricular activities, but also inclusion for, neurodiverse students that sometimes, have a harder time or, have anxiety around other competitive or team-based environments, and can really thrive through, kind of technology-based, communication and environment. So I just wanted to say that, this is a whole nother thing we didn't really discuss on, but the inclusion piece is obviously another great part of what esports can do for school and community, and making sure that everyone is included and has their space to find belonging and success pathways. So yeah.
Well, Elliot, thank you so much for hanging out with us on the Disrupt Education podcast. We'll definitely put your information in the notes. And we're going to wrap up there. For Allie Privet, I'm Peter Hostrasser. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Take a look at our sponsor, and also take a look at what Elliot's doing. His links and everything will be in the notes. We'll catch you next time on the Disrupt Education podcast. Thank you so much for joining us on this week's episode of the Disrupt Education podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode.
Are you ready to disrupt the educational arena you're a part of? For more ways to get involved in the work we do here at Disrupt Education, check us out at disrupteducation.co. or find us on LinkedIn at Peter Hostrasser or Allie Privet.
Our mission here is to help facilitate and amplify changes in the educational system through local initiatives and help you scale them into community movements. Our building network of disruptors in education are working to move beyond scores and grades as the only measure for student learning. If your school district, college, campus, or organization is looking for facilitators of this work, reach out on our website or social media.
And if you have any thoughts or feedback on this week's episode or any episode, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries, taking risks, and most importantly, disrupting education.